A silent rider buys a mother and child, unaware that she would heal his heart. I ain't sayin' nothin'. Just don't send me back. The wind tore through the barren plain, dry and merciless. It was a wind that knew nothing of comfort, only of scouring the earth down to its bones, carrying grit that stung the skin and settled in the folds of worn-down clothing. Kalen felt it on his face, a familiar and biting companion on the long ride from his homestead. He was a man carved from the same hard landscape, broad-shouldered and weathered, with eyes the color of a slate evening sky. Silence was his native tongue, his cabin in the high country a fortress built of it. He came to the town of Redemption perhaps 4 times a year, a giant moving through its dusty street with an unobtrusive quiet that made people look away. He endured their stares, their whispers about the lone Apache on the mountain, because solitude demanded a tax of supplies. He bought flour, salt, and bullets, his needs as simple and raw as the land he called home. He never lingered. Today, however, something held him. A tension in the frosty air, thicker than the usual suspicion that greeted him. He didn't know it yet, but his first true home was right in front of him. He saw her then, a woman standing near the mercantile, a small boy clutching the thin fabric of her skirt. She was made to be an island of shame. Her hair was hacked short, a ragged, brutal shearing that exposed the delicate line of her neck to the harsh judgment of the dusty sun. Her face, smudged and deliberately blackened with soot, was a mask of humiliation meant to erase her. Yet, it could not conceal the exhausted dignity in her posture, nor the alert, protective curve of her body around her child. Her eyes, when they briefly met his, were not broken. They were like a deep fog, concealing everything behind a wall of overtired stillness. He saw her flinch when a group of townsfolk passed by, their laughter a sharp, cruel sound. He saw the boy bury his face deeper into her worn dress. A flicker of something ancient and painful tightened in Kalen's chest. On the hill behind his cabin, 2 wooden markers stood against the wind. A woman and a child. He had built his silence around their memory, a wall to keep the guilt from consuming him whole. He looked at the woman again, at the raw tremor in her hand as she smoothed her son's hair. His own hands, resting on his saddle horn, clenched into fists. He had come for salt. He was about to do something else entirely. The woman responsible for the desecration stepped out of the mercantile, her face a mask of sour piety. Her name was Agnes, and her virtue was as loud and brittle as her voice. She was the boy's aunt by marriage, a fact she wielded like a weapon. "There you are, Elara," she called out, the name itself an accusation. "Still standing there like a stray dog. I told you, I'll not have a useless mouth to feed in my house." A constant reminder of my brother's foolish charity, Elara said nothing. Her silence was a shield, thin but whole. The boy, whose name was Leo, looked up at his mother, his small face a knot of confusion and fear. The town watched, a scattered audience to a familiar cruelty. Some shuffled their feet, their gazes fixed on the dust. Others smirked, finding a grim satisfaction in another's fall. Agnes grabbed Elara's arm, her fingers digging in. "You'll not be shaming my good name, looking like that. Go on, get out of this town. Find your gutter." It was then that Kalen moved. He dismounted in one fluid, deliberate motion, the sound of his boots in the dust suddenly the only sound on the street. He was massive, a solid presence that seemed to draw all the light and air toward him. He walked past the gawking townsfolk, his face calm, his eyes fixed on Elara. He stopped before her. He didn't look at Agnes. He looked at the soot on Elara's cheek, at the ragged edge of her hair. He saw the trembling in her shoulders she was trying so desperately to conceal. A memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. His wife, shivering with fever, her hand just as unsteady. He had been helpless then. He would not be helpless now. He crouched, bringing his gaze level with the small boy. Leo froze, his eyes wide. Kalen's expression softened, a barely perceptible shift in the hard lines of his face. He said nothing to the boy, but the threat in the air seemed to lessen. Then he stood, turning his attention to Elara. The crowd held its breath. They expected violence or a curse. Instead, he spoke, his voice low and steady, a sound like rocks settling deep in the earth. "You're coming with me." It was not a question. It was a statement that rearranged the world. Agnes sputtered, her authority dissolving. "She's nothing. A beggar. You can't just—" He finally turned his gaze on her, and the words died in her throat. He reached out, not to touch Alara, but to gently take the small bundle of their belongings from her hand. He turned and tied it to his saddle. He gestured for her to walk. She hesitated, her eyes darting from his impassive face to the hostile crowd, then back. It was a choice between a familiar monster and an unknown one. She looked down at her son, at his pale, frightened face. She made her choice. She nodded once. He lifted the boy and settled him in the saddle, his large hands surprisingly gentle. Then he began to walk, leading the horse out of town, Alara trailing in his shadow. He did not look back. The town of Redemption was left with nothing but dust and their own stunned silence. She stayed. The journey to his homestead was a long, unsparing pilgrimage of silence. The biting wind was their only conversation, whipping Alara's shorn hair against her scalp and making Leo huddle deeper into the folds of Kalen's worn coat, which he had draped over the boy. Alara walked behind the horse, her worn-down shoes scuffing in the dust, her gaze fixed on the ground. Each of Kalen's heavy, rhythmic footsteps was a question she could not answer. She was a prisoner, a charity case, a strange new kind of burden. Suspicion was a cold, hard knot in her belly. She watched his back, the broad, solid expanse of it, and saw not a savior but a mystery as vast and intimidating as the wilderness they were entering. He was an Apache, a man the town treated like a ghost. She knew the stories they told. What kind of man would take a shamed woman and her child for no reason? Her mind, exhausted and raw, could only supply terrifying answers. She remained rigid, her body a fortress of concealed fear. They climbed higher, leaving the dusty plain for the sharp scent of pine and the cracking ice of mountain streams. The air grew colder, cleaner. When the sun began to sink, painting the sky in bruised shades of purple and orange, his cabin came into view. It was small, sturdy, built of thick logs and chinked with mud, a plume of smoke rising from a stone chimney. It looked like it had grown from the earth itself. On a nearby hill, she saw them. Two simple wooden markers, stark against the sky. Her breath caught. Kalen led the horse to a small corral, untied her bundle, and handed it to her without a word. He opened the cabin's heavy wooden door and stood aside. Inside, a fire in the stone hearth cast a smoky lamplight over a single room. It was starkly clean, masculine. A table, two chairs, a bed in one corner, a cast-iron stove. He gestured to a small, curtained-off alcove containing a narrow cot. "For you," he said. His voice was rough from disuse. He put a pot of water on the stove, pulled a tin cup from a hook, and scooped dried beans into a bowl. The sounds were small, deliberate, the creak of floorboards, the scrape of metal on tin, the soft hiss of the fire. He worked with a quiet efficiency that left no room for questions. He served her and the boy a portion of beans and bread on tin plates. They ate in absolute silence, the gulf between them wide and deep. When they were done, he took the plates. He laid out a thick blanket on the cot for them, an old but clean one. He then took his own blanket and went to sleep on the floor by the hearth, turning his back to them. Alara lay awake for hours, listening to the howl of a distant wolf and the steady, soft breathing of the man on the other side of the room. She felt Leo tremble beside her. She pulled the blanket tighter around him. She was safe from the wind. She wasn't sure about anything else. Days bled into one another, marked only by the rising and setting of the pale winter sun. Their lives fell into a routine devoid of words. Kalen would rise before dawn, his movements quiet, unobtrusive. He would chop wood deep into the night, the rhythmic thud of the axe echoing in the frosty air, as if he were splitting his own guilt into manageable pieces. He would hunt, returning with rabbits or a deer, leaving the meat on the table without ceremony. Alara, in turn, established her own silent territory. She swept the floor, cooked their meals, and mended the boys' clothes. She moved with a cautious, dignified grace, her presence a quiet hum against the backdrop of his profound stillness. She never entered his space by the hearth. He never crossed the invisible line to her alcove. They were two planets in a shared, silent orbit, held apart by gravity and fear. But she watched him. She saw things. One morning, she found the boy's worn-out shoes placed by the wooden door. The sole on one, which had been flapping loose, was now neatly stitched with thick, waxed thread. She knew he must have done it in the dead of night, while she and Leo slept. She said nothing, but a strange warmth spread through her chest, unsettling and unfamiliar. Another day, after returning from the stream with buckets of water, she found a small, new bar of lye soap sitting beside the washbasin. Next to it was a shard of a mirror, polished and propped against the wall. It was the first time she had truly seen her own reflection since that day in town. She saw the dark smudges of soot, a badge of shame she had grown accustomed to. She saw the ragged, boyish cut of her hair. But for the first time, she also saw the weariness in her own eyes give way to a flicker of something else. That evening, using the soap, she scrubbed her face until her skin was raw and clean. The water in the basin turned black, felt like washing away more than just soot. She looked in the mirror again. Her face was pale and thin, but it was her own. She was no longer a caricature of shame. She was just Alara. She still said nothing to Kalen. Words were too heavy, too dangerous. But when she served him his meal that night, their eyes met for a moment longer than usual. Acknowledgement passed between them, as quiet and significant as the first drop of rain after a long drought. He nodded, a barely perceptible dip of his chin. It was enough. The blizzard arrived without warning, a monstrous white wall that descended from the peaks and swallowed the world. The wind shrieked like a banshee, throwing fists of snow against the cabin walls and piling drifts against the wooden door. The deep fog of a normal mountain morning was nothing compared to this blinding, roaring whiteness. For 3 days they were sealed inside the small cabin, the world reduced to the 4 log walls and the steady, hungry roar of the fire in the hearth. The enforced proximity was a physical pressure, shrinking the already small space until their silences brushed up against each other. Kalen seemed to grow even more still, a mountain of calm in the heart of the storm. Alara felt her own tension coil tighter. On the 3rd night it happened. Leo began to cough, a dry, rasping sound that echoed in the storm's brief lulls. By morning, his forehead was hot to the touch, his breathing shallow and quick. He was burning with fever. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Alara's exhaustion. She crouched by the cot, bathing his face with a damp rag, her own hands trembling. She felt utterly helpless, trapped by the storm with her sick child. Kalen watched her from across the room. He saw the raw fear in her eyes, the same fear he remembered feeling as he watched his own daughter's life slip away. He got up. He moved to the hearth and took down a small leather pouch from a high shelf. He opened it, releasing the earthy scent of dried herbs. "For the fever," he said, his voice a low rumble beneath the wind's howl. He boiled water in a small pot over the stove, adding pinches of the herbs with deliberate, practiced hands. He strained the liquid into a tin cup and brought it over. Alara flinched as he approached, her protective instinct overriding everything else. He stopped, holding out the cup. He didn't try to get closer. He simply waited. His eyes were not demanding, but steady, honest. She looked from his calm face to her son's flushed cheeks. She took the cup. Together, they coaxed the warm, bitter tea past Leo's lips. All through the night, as the blizzard raged, they kept a silent vigil. Kalen sat in a chair he had pulled near the cot, feeding the fire, brewing more tea. Alara never left Leo's side, stroking his hair, whispering soft reassurances. The silence between them was no longer one of distance and suspicion. It was a shared space, a partnership forged in the crucible of a child's fever and a raging storm. Toward dawn, the wind began to subside. At the same time, Leo's breathing deepened, becoming more even. Alara placed a hand on his forehead. The fire was gone. He was cool, sleeping peacefully. A wave of relief so profound it was painful washed over her. She looked up at Kalen. His massive frame slumped in the chair, his face shadowed with exhaustion. Tears she had suppressed for months finally fell, hot and silent. He simply nodded, as if to say, I know. The storm had broken, and so had the ice around her heart. Spring came to the high country not as a gentle awakening, but as a slow, grudging retreat of winter. The cracking ice in the streams gave way to a murmur of running water, and patches of green appeared on the forest floor. With the melting of the snow came a melting of the rigid silence within the cabin. Words were still rare, but they were no longer impossible. A quiet thank you from Alara when he brought in a load of firewood. A soft he is strong from Kalen, nodding toward Leo, who was now chasing butterflies in the dusty sun outside the door. Alara's hair had begun to grow, softening the harsh lines of the forest cut into a dark halo around her face. The soot was a distant memory, and in its place was the quiet beauty of a woman who had endured. She had even planted a small garden near the cabin, her hands in the earthy soil a testament to her growing hope. One afternoon, the sound of an approaching wagon broke the peace. Alara froze. She knew that sound. Kalen, who was splitting logs, stopped his work, the axe held loosely in his hand. Down the path, a buckboard appeared, carrying the town sheriff and, next to him, the stiff, righteous figure of Agnes. Humiliation had come to find her. Agnes climbed down from the wagon, her face pinched with vindictive triumph. "Sheriff, there she is," she announced, pointing a bony finger. "The thief. She ran off with that heathen. Probably stole him blind just like she tried with me." The sheriff, a weary man named Miller, tipped his hat. "Mum." Kalen Alara felt the old shame wash over her. She instinctively reached for Leo, pulling him behind her skirt as she lowered her gaze to the ground. Agnes advanced, her voice rising. "Look at her, shameless. Living up here in sin with an Indian. I've come to take the boy. He'll not be raised by the likes of you." Leo clung to his mother's leg, crying softly. Alara stood her ground, her body a shield. She was silent, but she was not broken. She would not let this woman touch her son. At that moment, Kalen moved. He walked over and stood between Alara and Agnes. He didn't touch anyone. He didn't raise his voice. He simply became a wall, solid, immovable. He was her protector. The crowd in redemption had fallen silent before his presence. Agnes was no different. He looked down at the smaller woman, his face impassive but his eyes holding a power she could not challenge. Then he spoke, his words clear and deliberate in the mountain air, for the sheriff and the world to hear. "She's with me," he paused, letting the words settle. "Not bought." Chosen, the sheriff looked from Kalen's resolute face to Alara's trembling, dignified form, and then to the terrified child hiding behind her. He saw the small, thriving garden. He saw the neat stack of firewood. He saw a home. He turned to Agnes. "There's no crime here, Agnes. This is their place. It's time for you to go." Agnes stared, sputtering, but the authority in the sheriff's voice was final. Defeated, she climbed back into the wagon. As it pulled away, Alara finally looked up at Kalen. His back was still to her, a silent guard. He had not just saved her. He had claimed her in front of the world that had cast her out. She cried, but this time, the tears were not from shame. He stayed. That evening, a profound quiet settled over the homestead, different from the silence that had come before. It was not a silence of absence or fear, but one of fullness, of things finally said. The dusk was a soft, slate gray, and the wind whispered through the new leaves on the aspens. They sat on the rough-hewn bench outside the cabin door, a space that had once been a borderland between them and was now shared ground. Leo was asleep inside, safe. Alara broke the stillness, her voice soft, unsteady. "No one has ever stood for me like that." Kalen didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the darkening line of the mountains. He only nodded. Encouraged, she continued, the words spilling out in a quiet rush, telling him of her husband's death, of the poverty, of Agnes's escalating cruelty that culminated in the public shearing and blackening of her face. She spoke of the hollowed-out feeling, the exhaustion of simply trying to be invisible to survive. She laid her story, piece by broken piece, into the gentle air between them. He listened. He did not interrupt, did not offer platitudes. He just listened, his presence a solid, calming anchor. When she finished, her voice trailing off into the chirping of the crickets, he finally turned his head. His eyes, in the dim light, were filled with a suppressed, ancient pain. There's a grave on that hill, he said, his voice a low, rough thing. He didn't need to point. She knew. My wife, Sarah. My daughter, little bird, he swallowed, the sound raw and loud in the quiet. Fever took them. I was away trapping. Came back too late. He looked down at his own large, capable hands, as if they were foreign objects. I built this cabin for them. Built my life on a promise to keep them safe. I failed. The confession hung between them, a shared secret of loss and guilt. He had not just seen a woman and child in need that day in redemption. He had seen a chance to answer for the ghosts on the hill. He had seen a chance at redemption. Alara looked at this giant, silent man who had just admitted to his own profound brokenness. Her heart, which had been so carefully guarded, ached for him. Without thinking, her hand reached out and rested on his powerful forearm. The contact was electric, a current of shared sorrow and understanding. His muscles tensed beneath her touch, then relaxed. He did not pull away. In that simple gesture, two solitudes merged. They were no longer alone in their pain. They were survivors together. The seasons turned, and the homestead thrived. Spring's tentative green deepened into the lushness of summer, then mellowed into the gold and fire of autumn. The biting wind of winter returned, but this time, it beat against a home, not just a shelter. The silence that filled the cabin was now a comfortable, breathing thing, punctuated by the sounds of a life being built together. Leo's laughter became a common music as he followed Kalen, his small shadow mimicking the larger one. Kalen taught the boy how to read the tracks of animals, how to know which berries were safe, how to carve a piece of soft pine into the shape of a bird. He was a father again, his movements no longer just deliberate but tender. Alara's garden overflowed with beans and squash, which she canned and stored for the winter, her actions creating a pantry full of security and promise. Her hair grew long and thick, and she often tied it back with a simple leather thong Kalen had made for her. The haunted, overtired look in her eyes was replaced by a calm, steady light. They were a family, forged not by law or ceremony, but by the slow, patient work of mutual healing. One evening, as the first snows of the new winter began to fall, Kalen brought a new piece of furniture into the cabin. It was a wooden rocker, carved from a single massive piece of oak. The wood was smooth and warm, polished to a soft gleam. He had been working on it for months, in the quiet hours after she and Leo were asleep. It was solid, reliable, and beautiful in its simplicity. It was everything he could not say in words. He placed it by the stove, in the warm circle of light from the fire. He didn't say, "This is for you." He didn't have to. Alara ran her hand over the curved back. She sat down, and the chair fit her perfectly, rocking with a gentle, soothing rhythm. It was a throne of quiet dignity. Leo climbed into her lap, and she wrapped her arms around him, her gaze meeting Kalen's across the room. In his eyes, she saw not the ghost of a past loss, but the promise of a shared future. Winter had passed. A true home had been found. Love grows where no one looks for it, in the hard soil of sorrow and silence. It is not always a sudden fire, but often a slow, creeping warmth, like the sun returning to a frozen mountainside. For Kalen and Alara, it was a language spoken not with mouths, but with hands. It was the perfectly mended shoe left by the door, a silent promise of care. It was the hot cup of herbal tea offered in the dead of a stormy night, a gesture of shared survival. It was the way he stood before her, a human shield against the cruelty of the world, his declaration. Not bought. Chosen. A vow more powerful than any spoken in a church. He didn't know, when he saw her standing in the dust, her face blackened with shame, that he was looking at his own salvation. He thought he was performing an act of penance for the family he had lost, a final, desperate gesture against the guilt that haunted his quiet days. But in saving her, he saved himself. He gave her a home, and she gave him a reason to live in it. From the dust of humiliation and the silence of grief, a family grew. From two closed and broken hearts, a home was built, log by log, gesture by gesture. The wooden rocker he carved for her was more than a chair. It was a symbol of permanence. The cradle he would later build for their own child, a quiet testament to a future he never thought he would have. The open window of their cabin no longer looked out upon a wilderness of solitude, but a landscape of promise. The wind still howled, but inside, there was warmth. There was peace. There was love. He didn't need to say, "Stay here," she already belonged. From dust and silence grew a home. From closed hearts, a family. Their story is a testament to the quiet strength of the human spirit and the power of a single, decent act to change the course of a life. It reminds us that redemption is not found in grand pronouncements, but in the steadfast, daily rhythm of care, and that true love is often a silent understanding shared across a warm room. If the story touched you, like warm light in a cold night, then carry it with you. Let it be a reminder that even in the harshest landscapes, kindness can take root and flourish. Remember the dignity of the survivor, the quiet courage of the protector, and the simple, profound beauty of two lonely souls finding their way back to one another. Subscribe to our channel for more stories full of silence, courage, and genuine closeness. And tell us what moved you the most. Was it the moment he stood before her as a shield, or the quiet vigil they kept during the blizzard? Let us know in the comments. We'll see you again, where silence means home.